Ambassador Krelvar adjusted his seven-eyed sensor array, wondering if perhaps his translation matrix had malfunctioned. Surely, the primitive bipeds from Sol 3 couldn't have just laughed at the Galactic Council's ultimatum. The massive holographic display in the council chambers still showed the human delegation, sitting casually in their rickety metal chairs like they were attending some backwater agricultural meeting instead of facing the combined might of 47 galactic civilizations. The lead human, a middle-aged female with graying hair and an expression that suggested perpetual amusement, had just finished reading the surrender terms. Her response? A genuine chuckle that somehow managed to sound both polite and deeply insulting. "I'm sorry," the human said, her voice carrying across the quantum-fold communication array with crystal clarity. "Did you just demand that Earth surrender all defensive capabilities, submit to neural compliance restructuring, and pay tribute in the form of 90% of our planetary resources?" She paused, glancing at her companions. "Marcus, did I read that correctly?" The male human beside her, apparently named Marcus Hoffman according to the bioscan, nodded solemnly. "That's what it says, Director Hayes. They also want us to relocate our entire population to designated mining colonies in the outer rim sectors." Hayes, Director Elena Hayes, the bioscan now clarified, looked back at the camera with what Krelvar's cultural analysis subroutines identified as barely contained mirth. "Well then. That's ambitious of you." Councillor Thexprime's tentacles writhed in agitation from his position at the High Assembly podium. His species, the Nexarian Collective, had conquered 17 star systems through nothing more than implied threats. The fact that these humans seemed genuinely entertained by their demands was unprecedented. "You find our terms amusing, primitive?" Thexprime's voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic amplifiers, each word dripping with the authority of a being who had never been questioned, let alone mocked. Hayes leaned back in her chair, a gesture that somehow managed to look both casual and predatory. "Oh, absolutely. I mean, the sheer audacity is impressive. Really, it is. You've managed to combine territorial expansion, genocide, and slavery into one neat little package. Very efficient." She smiled, and Krelvar's threat assessment protocols immediately flagged it as dangerous. "There's just one tiny problem with your plan." "Enlighten us," Councillor Yethka hissed from her floating meditation sphere, her serpentine form coiling with barely restrained violence. "Well," Hayes said, studying her fingernails with theatrical interest, "it assumes we're going to say yes." The silence that followed was so complete that Krelvar could hear the hum of his own neural processors. 47 civilizations, billions of years of collective evolution, technologies that could reshape reality itself, all rendered speechless by a species that had barely figured out faster-than-light travel. Councillor Vexnull was the first to recover, his mechanical voice cutting through the quiet like a plasma cutter through hull plating. "Perhaps you misunderstand the situation, humans. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of inevitable fact. Your species will comply, or your species will be eliminated." "Ah," Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "The comply or die approach. Classic." She turned to the third member of her delegation. "What do you think, Commander Singh? Should we be scared?" Commander Rajesh Singh, a man whose bio-reading suggested he was significantly more dangerous than his calm demeanor indicated, pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well, Director, they do have us outnumbered approximately 20 million to 1 in terms of fleet strength. Their weapons technology is roughly 3 centuries ahead of ours. And they've successfully conquered every other species they've encountered." He paused. "On the other hand, yes?" Hayes prompted, though her eyes never left the camera. "They've never encountered humans before." The way Singh said it sent an inexplicable chill through Krelvar's exoskeleton. There was something in the human's tone, not quite a threat, not quite a promise, but something that sat uncomfortable in the space between. Thexprime's tentacles had stopped writhing. In fact, every member of the council had gone unnaturally still, as if some predatory instinct buried deep in their evolutionary past had suddenly awakened and was screaming warnings. You speak of your species as if it were somehow exceptional, Counselor Yethka said carefully. Hayes exchanged glances with her companions, and Krelvar caught something that made his primary heart skip several beats. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't even particularly concerned. If anything, they looked eager. Exceptional? Hayes mused. I suppose that depends on your definition. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy, obviously. We're not the smartest, or the most technologically advanced, or the most numerous. She leaned forward slightly. But we do have a few quirks that make us interesting. Such as? Vexnull demanded. Well, for starters, we're absolutely terrible at knowing when we're beaten. Marcus spoke up for the first time since the initial reading, his voice carrying the same dangerous undercurrent as his companions. It's really quite embarrassing, from an evolutionary standpoint. Any sensible species would have gone extinct millennia ago. Singh nodded gravely. We have this unfortunate tendency to interpret impossible odds as personal challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles. And then there's our complete inability to respect natural hierarchies, Hayes added conversationally. It's caused us no end of trouble throughout our history. Kings, emperors, gods, we just can't seem to stop questioning their authority. Krelvar's analytical subroutines were running probability calculations at maximum capacity, and every single outcome matrix was returning the same impossible result. The humans were confident they could win. Not hopeful. Not desperate. Confident. You cannot seriously believe you can stand against the combined might of the Galactic Council, Counselor Drathmore rumbled from his stone throne, his crystalline wings flaring in agitation. Hayes smiled again, and this time even the other council members recoiled slightly. Oh, we absolutely can't. Not in any conventional sense. She stood up slowly, her companions following suit. But here's the thing about humans, counselors. We stopped fighting conventional wars around the same time we figured out that atoms could be persuaded to release their energy in interesting ways. The temperature in the council chambers seemed to drop several degrees. Are you threatening us with nuclear weapons? Thexprime's voice had lost some of its imperious tone. Nuclear? Hayes looked genuinely surprised. Oh, goodness no. That's 20th century thinking. We've moved well beyond splitting atoms. She paused, as if considering how much to reveal. Though I suppose nuclear is technically accurate, if you include fusion-based stellar manipulation and quantum cascade reality restructuring under that umbrella. Several council members began urgent consultations with their tactical advisors. Krelvar's own research protocols were frantically accessing the collective database, searching for any information about human military capabilities. What he found made his primary breathing apparatus seize. The humans had been classified as a Class II developing civilization, barely capable of interplanetary colonization, no significant military threat, suitable for standard conquest protocols. But the data was wrong. Catastrophically, impossibly wrong. Director Hayes, he found himself saying, his voice cutting through the growing murmur of concerned voices, our intelligence suggests your species has only recently achieved faster-than-light capability. Your military technology should be centuries behind our most primitive member civilizations. Hayes looked directly at him, and Krelvar felt those disturbingly expressive human eyes boring into his sensor array like plasma drills. Ambassador Krelvar, isn't it? Nexorian Intelligence Division, if I'm reading your biosignature correctly. She smiled pleasantly. Tell me, how exactly did your intelligence gathering work? Long-range scans? Intercepted communications? Cultural observation? Standard protocols, Krelvar replied automatically, though something in his processing matrix was screaming warnings. Ah. Hayes nodded as if that explained everything. Long-range observation of our outer colonies and routine shipping traffic. She turned to Singh. Commander, what's our current classification in their database? Class 2 Developing Civilization, Director. No significant military threat. And when was their most recent comprehensive assessment? Approximately 18 months ago, Terran Standard. Hayes turned back to the camera, and her expression had shifted subtly. The amusement was still there, but underneath it was something that made Krelvar's threat assessment protocols scream in binary terror. Gentle beings of the Council, she said softly, 18 months ago, that assessment would have been accurate. We were a Class 2 civilization, barely capable of defending our own system, let alone projecting force beyond it. She paused. But 18 months ago, we made a rather significant discovery. The council chambers had gone dead silent again. What discovery? Counselor Yethka whispered. Hayes's smile widened, and Krelvar realized with growing horror that it wasn't entirely pleasant anymore. We found out we weren't alone in the universe. We discovered that there was a vast, powerful galactic civilization that had been watching us, studying us, categorizing us. She leaned closer to the camera. And planning to enslave us. The implications hit the council like a kinetic bombardment. Every member was accessing their own intelligence networks, pulling historical data, analyzing timeline correlations. The humans had known about the Galactic Council for over a year. They'd had 18 months to prepare. So, Hayes continued conversationally, we did what humans always do when faced with an existential threat from a superior enemy. We adapted. We innovated. We prepared. She gestured casually to her companions. And we got creative. Marcus cleared his throat politely. Director, should we mention the Prometheus Initiative? Oh, I think that might be premature, Marcus. We wouldn't want to spoil the surprise. Krelvar's analysis subroutines were approaching critical overflow. The humans had known. They'd known, and they'd spent 18 months preparing for this exact confrontation. Every tactical advantage the Council possessed, surprise, superior numbers, technological supremacy, had been negated by simple advance warning. This changes nothing, Thexprime declared, though his tentacles were betraying his uncertainty with their nervous writhing. You had 18 months. We've had 18 millennia to perfect our military doctrine. Your preparations, however extensive, cannot possibly, excuse me, Hayes interrupted politely. I'm sorry to cut you off, Counselor, but I'm getting a priority communication from Earth. She touched something on her wrist, and her eyes glazed slightly as she received whatever message was being transmitted. After a moment, she refocused on the camera with an expression of mild disappointment. Well, that's unfortunate, she sighed. It seems your advance fleet has arrived in the Sol system. Every council member immediately accessed their tactical networks. Sure enough, the Galactic Council's first wave, 200 of their most advanced warships, had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human home system. It was meant to be a show of force, a demonstration of the futility of resistance. As expected, Vexnull stated with mechanical satisfaction. Perhaps now you will reconsider your position. Hayes looked genuinely sad. I really wish you hadn't done that, counselors. We specifically requested that you keep your ships outside our system until after these negotiations concluded. She shook her head regretfully. But I suppose some lessons can only be learned through direct experience. Your pathetic system defense grid cannot possibly threaten our fleet, Counselor Drathmore boomed confidently. System defense grid? Hayes looked confused. Oh, we don't have one of those. She brightened. We have something much better. Before anyone could ask what she meant, every tactical display in the council chambers exploded with incoming data. The 200 ships of the first wave, vessels capable of sterilizing entire planets, had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not disabled. Gone, as if they had never existed at all. What? Thexprime's voice had dropped to barely a whisper. What did you do? Hayes checked her wrist display again. Well, technically, we didn't do anything. They violated the territorial boundary of a sovereign star system during a diplomatic negotiation. Our automated defense protocols handled the rest. Automated? Krelvar heard himself ask, though his voice seemed to be coming from very far away. Oh yes. We learned a lot from studying your long-range scans over the past 18 months. Particularly interesting was your propulsion technology, folding spacetime to achieve faster-than-light travel. Hayes's expression was almost academic now. We realized that if you could fold space, you could also unfold it. Selectively. Precisely. At the quantum level. The horrible understanding began to dawn on the assembled council members. You collapsed local spacetime around our fleet, Counselor Yethka breathed. Temporarily inverted their quantum matrices, actually. Much cleaner than conventional weapons, no debris, no energy signatures, no environmental contamination. Hayes looked up from her display. They're not destroyed, exactly. They're just somewhere else now. Someone else might be more accurate. Singh leaned forward helpfully. Our calculations suggest they'll reappear in approximately 4.7 billion years, assuming stable universal expansion rates. In a completely different galaxy, Marcus added cheerfully, the silence stretched for long moments as the full implications sank in. The humans hadn't just defeated the Council's advance fleet, they'd made it disappear with technology that treated spacetime itself as a manipulable resource. It was beyond anything in the Council's extensive archives, beyond the theoretical frameworks of their most advanced civilizations. This is impossible, Thexprime finally managed. No species developed such technology in 18 months. The mathematical frameworks alone would require centuries of theoretical work. Hayes tilted her head thoughtfully. You know, you're absolutely right. Which brings us to the second thing your intelligence assessment missed about humanity. Her smile returned, sharp and predatory. We don't develop new technology. We adapt existing technology. And we don't work alone. What do you mean? Krelvar asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. Well, Hayes said conversationally, it turns out that when you've been secretly observing a species for decades, sometimes that species notices. And when they investigate further, they discover that the galaxy is full of civilizations who have been conquered, enslaved, or destroyed by the same Galactic Council that's now threatening them. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop to absolute zero. Some of those civilizations, Hayes continued, left behind certain gifts for any species clever enough to find them and ethical enough to use them responsibly. Marcus nodded gravely. The Kalari left us their quantum mechanics archives. The Threnodai provided stellar engineering protocols. The Yix Collective shared their spacetime manipulation theories. All extinct civilizations, Singh added quietly. All destroyed by the Galactic Council's inevitable expansion. Hayes leaned back in her chair, her expression settling into something cold and implacable. So you see, counselors, when you demand our surrender, you're not just threatening humanity. You're threatening the last hope of every species you've destroyed over the millennia. Their knowledge, their dreams, their desire for justice, it all lives on through us now. She stood up slowly, her companions flanking her like some ancient warrior formation. And that, Hayes said softly, is why we're not surrendering. The holographic display flickered once, and went dark. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 47 minutes after the human transmission ended. Krelvar had never seen the chambers in such disarray, 47 civilizations arguing simultaneously in dozens of languages, their translation matrices struggling to keep pace with the cascade of panic and outrage. Order. Thexprime's voice boomed through the acoustic dampeners, his tentacles writhing in complex patterns that signaled extreme agitation. We will have order in this chamber. Gradually, the cacophony subsided to a manageable roar of concerned murmurs. Counselor Vexnull's mechanical form clicked and whirred as he processed the tactical data streaming across his optical displays. Preliminary analysis complete, he announced, his synthesized voice cutting through the remaining chatter. The human spacetime manipulation technology demonstrates capabilities that exceed our theoretical maximums by approximately 3,000%. The energy requirements alone should have required the complete conversion of their star system's mass. Yet they accomplished it without any detectable energy signatures, Counselor Yethka added, her serpentine form coiled tightly around her meditation sphere. Our sensors registered nothing, no gravitational anomalies, no quantum fluctuations, no dimensional stress patterns. The fleet simply ceased to exist in this reality. Krelvar accessed his personal data banks, cross-referencing the human claims against historical records. What he found made his exoskeleton plates clatter involuntarily. Counselors, I have verified the humans' assertions regarding extinct civilizations. The Kalari, Threnodai, and Yix Collective were indeed conquered by Council forces. Their archives were supposedly destroyed during the pacification campaigns. Supposedly, Counselor Drathmore rumbled from his stone throne, crystalline wings folding tightly against his massive frame. Yet somehow, these humans have accessed technologies that those civilizations spent millennia developing. The implications were staggering. If the humans had somehow recovered and integrated the lost knowledge of multiple advanced civilizations, then their technological capabilities were not just unknown, they were unknowable. Worse, every extinct species conquered by the Council represented another potential weapon in humanity's growing arsenal. This complicates our strategic assessment, Thex Prime admitted reluctantly. However, we must remember that regardless of their defensive capabilities, the humans remain a single species on one planet. We can simply bypass their defenses entirely. Counselor Mortex, who had remained silent throughout the emergency session, finally spoke up. His species, the Korthak hegemony, specialized in psychological warfare and had broken more civilizations through terror than through direct military action. Perhaps, he said carefully, we are approaching this incorrectly. The humans display confidence, but confidence can be shattered. They may have acquired advanced defensive technologies, but they cannot have had time to fully integrate them into their society. Their civilian population must still be vulnerable. Several council members nodded agreement. It was a sound tactical assessment: target the soft civilian centers, force the military forces to spread their defenses thin, then exploit the inevitable gaps in coverage. Agreed, Thex Prime declared. We will implement Protocol Omega-7. Simultaneous strikes against all human colonial settlements, forcing them to choose between protecting their homeworld and protecting their outer territories. The Council began coordinating their forces with the practiced efficiency of a military machine that had conquered thousands of worlds. Within hours, the largest fleet in galactic history was assembled, over 10,000 warships representing the combined might of 47 civilizations. It was enough firepower to sterilize entire star clusters, but as the massive armada prepared to jump to hyperspace, Krelvar found himself accessing Earth's communication frequencies. Call it professional curiosity, or perhaps some deeper survival instinct, but something compelled him to monitor human civilian broadcasts during their final hours. What he found was unexpected. Instead of panic or despair, Earth's communication networks were buzzing with something that his translation matrix labeled as anticipation. News broadcasts showed crowds gathering in public spaces, but they weren't fleeing or seeking shelter. They were celebrating. Citizens of Earth, came a familiar voice over the primary broadcast channel. Director Hayes appeared on screens across the planet, but she was no longer in the sterile conference room. Instead, she stood in what appeared to be a massive command center, with holographic displays showing real-time positions of Council forces throughout the galaxy. As you've no doubt heard by now, the Galactic Council has rejected our diplomatic overtures and is currently mobilizing the largest military force in recorded history to attack our colonies, Hayes said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. I want to assure everyone that this was entirely expected, and all preparations are proceeding according to plan. Krelvar's analysis subroutines frantically tried to parse the emotional undertones in her voice. Confidence, certainly. Amusement, still present. But underneath it all was something else, something that made his threat assessment protocols flash urgent warnings. Phase 1 of Operation Renaissance has been a complete success, Hayes continued. The Council has committed 97% of their total military assets to this offensive, leaving their homeworlds essentially defenseless. Phase 2 will commence in approximately 6 hours. Phase 2? The humans had phases. Commander Singh stepped into view beside Hayes, consulting a tablet with casual efficiency. Director, Fleet Admiral Torres reports that all stealth reconnaissance units are in position. The Hestia network is fully operational and synchronized. We're ready to proceed on your command. Excellent. Hayes turned back to the camera, and her expression shifted subtly. The amusement was fading, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Citizens, what you're about to witness may seem impossible. Over the next few hours, we're going to demonstrate that the age of galactic tyranny is ending. Not through conquest, not through subjugation, but through liberation. She paused, looking directly into the camera as if she could see every viewer personally. Every species the Council has enslaved, every civilization they've destroyed, every world they've strip-mined and abandoned, they all left traces. Hidden archives, buried technologies, quantum echoes of their final messages. For 18 months, we've been following those traces, learning their stories, and honoring their memories by preparing for this moment. Krelvar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton as the full scope of human preparation began to dawn on him. They hadn't just acquired extinct technologies, they'd been conducting a galaxy-wide archaeological investigation, systematically recovering the lost knowledge of every civilization the Council had destroyed. The Kalari taught us to manipulate quantum foam, Hayes continued, her voice taking on an almost reverent tone. The Threnodai showed us how to engineer stellar phenomena. The Yix Collective shared their mastery of parallel dimensional matrices. But most importantly, the Sithra left us their greatest gift, the locations of every Council homeworld, and the access codes to bypass their planetary defense grids. The temperature in Krelvar's command center seemed to drop to absolute zero. The Sithra had been the Council's most trusted member species, responsible for maintaining security protocols across all member worlds. Their betrayal and subsequent rebellion had been crushed over 2 millennia ago, their entire species sterilized to prevent any spread of their seditious ideologies, except, apparently, they had left behind a final gift for whoever might one day be in a position to use it. So, Hayes said with that familiar, terrifying smile, while the Council's fleets are busy traveling to attack our colonies, we're going to pay a visit to their homes. All of their homes. Simultaneously. The broadcast switched to a tactical display showing the galaxy in real time. Krelvar watched in growing horror as hundreds of small red dots appeared throughout Council space, each one representing a human ship that had somehow infiltrated the most heavily defended star systems in the galaxy without triggering a single alarm. Operation Renaissance Phase 2, Hayes announced, commences now. Across the galaxy, on 47 different worlds, the homeworlds of the Galactic Council's member species experienced the same phenomenon simultaneously. Their defensive grid simply turned off. Every orbital platform, every automated defense satellite, every planetary shield generator, all of them shut down at exactly the same moment, as if someone had thrown a master switch. Then, in the skies above each world, small human vessels appeared. Not warships. Krelvar's sensors identified them as modified cargo haulers and exploration craft, barely armed and certainly not capable of threatening planetary populations. Instead of weapons, they began broadcasting. Citizens of the galaxy, came a new voice, not Hayes, but someone speaking in flawless Nexarian. My name is Professor Lisa Martinez, and I represent the Human Liberation Initiative. We are not here to conquer your worlds or harm your people. We are here to offer you a choice. Similar broadcasts began simultaneously across all Council homeworlds, each in the appropriate local languages. Krelvar found himself accessing multiple feeds at once, his processing matrix struggling to keep up with the sheer scope of the operation. For millennia, your leaders have told you that galactic conquest was necessary for your survival, the human professor continued. They have convinced you that other species were inferior, that slavery was natural, that resistance was futile. Today, we're going to show you the truth. The broadcasts switched to historical records, not the sanitized council archives, but original documents recovered from extinct civilizations. Archaeological evidence of peaceful first contacts turned into conquest campaigns. Communication intercepts showing council leaders discussing the deliberate extermination of species whose only crime was refusing to submit. Most damaging of all were the recordings from the council's own archives, showing the casual discussions about which species to target next, which worlds had the most valuable resources, which populations would make the most effective slave labor. Your children are fighting and dying in fleets across the galaxy right now, Martinez continued, not to defend your homes, but to expand an empire built on the bones of 1,000 extinct civilizations. Is this the legacy you want them to inherit? Krelvar's communication arrays were being flooded with incoming transmissions from across council space. On world after world, civilian populations were seeing the true history of their civilization for the first time. The carefully maintained propaganda about defensive necessity and civilizing missions was crumbling under the weight of documented evidence, but worse than the historical revelations were the technical demonstrations. The humans weren't just broadcasting, they were showcasing technologies that made the Council's greatest achievements look primitive by comparison. Medical advances that could extend lifespans by centuries. Energy systems that could power entire worlds without environmental damage. Agricultural techniques that could eliminate scarcity forever. These technologies, Martinez explained, were developed by the species your council destroyed. The Kalari had solved aging. The Threnodai had mastered clean fusion. The Yix Collective had eliminated resource scarcity. All of this knowledge was lost because your leaders chose conquest over cooperation. On Nexus Prime, Krelvar's homeworld, riots were already beginning. The revelation that their species had been complicit in genocide was bad enough, but the demonstration of lost medical technologies that could have saved millions of lives was sparking genuine revolutionary fervor. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. The carefully maintained social order that had supported council authority for millennia was collapsing in real time, replaced by populations demanding answers from leaders who had no good explanations to offer. Phase 3 will commence in 1 hour, Hayes announced from her command center. All Council military forces will be given the opportunity to surrender and return home to help rebuild their societies. Those who refuse will discover that the defensive technologies we demonstrated earlier have offensive applications as well. Krelvar accessed the tactical displays showing the Council's massive fleet, now approaching human colonial space. Over 10,000 ships, representing the finest military technology in the galaxy, were about to discover that their enemy had never intended to fight a defensive war. As if summoned by his thoughts, space around the entire Council armada began to shift. Not the violent distortions of their earlier demonstration, but something far more subtle and infinitely more terrifying. The fabric of spacetime itself was being rewritten, creating corridors of accelerated time that aged anything passing through them by millions of years and seconds. The mighty Council fleet found itself flying through regions where entropy moved at different speeds, where the laws of physics operated according to human whim rather than natural law. Ships that entered these zones emerged as ancient hulks, their crews long dead, their systems corroded to dust by the passage of subjective eons. Surrender now, Hayes broadcast to the remaining ships, or continue forward and discover what 10 million years of decay does to even the most advanced technology. The surrender began immediately. Ship after ship powered down weapons and engines, their crews no longer willing to face an enemy that treated time itself as a weapon. Within minutes, the largest military force in galactic history had become the largest prisoner of war camp in galactic history. Citizens of Earth, Hayes announced to her celebrating world, I'm pleased to report that the galactic threat to our independence has been resolved. The age of the Galactic Council is over. The age of galactic cooperation begins now. Krelvar shut down his monitoring systems and leaned back in his command chair, his seven-eyed sensor array dimming as he processed what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't just defeated the Council, they had systematically dismantled an empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia, using nothing more than the accumulated knowledge of their enemies' victims and a terrifying willingness to think beyond conventional warfare. As he prepared his own surrender transmission, Krelvar found himself wondering if perhaps his species' first assessment of humanity had been correct after all. They were exceptional, not despite their primitiveness, but because of their fundamental refusal to accept that anything was impossible. The galaxy would never be the same. And somehow, Krelvar suspected, that was exactly what the extinct civilizations had been hoping for when they left their gifts behind for someone brave enough, clever enough, and stubborn enough to use them. The humans, it turned out, were all three.